History is often thought of as a straight line, a sequence of dates and battles written by the victors in leather-bound books. But sometimes history is a ghost. It hides in the attic, wrapped in old linen. It sleeps in the dusty corners of antique shops, waiting for a buyer who knows what to look for. And occasionally, very occasionally, it arrives in a plain brown package with no return address, waiting to shatter everything we think we know about the past. In the quiet, forgotten town of Coldwater Creek, Ohio, on a rainy Tuesday in November, such a package arrived. It didn't look like much, just heavy paper wrapped in twine stained with the travel of 100 miles, but what lay inside would unlock a tragedy that had been buried for 170 years. It was a photograph, a single silver-plated image that captured 5 young faces staring out from the darkness of 1852. To the naked eye, it was just a portrait of sisters frozen in time. But under the microscope, it was a crime scene waiting to be solved. Before we unravel the mystery of the Mercer Sisters, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. History has secrets, and we are here to find them. Leave a comment below. What is the strangest thing you've ever found in an old photograph? Let's begin. Dr. Lydia Harrow was a woman who lived in the past because the present was far too noisy. At 58 years old, she was the senior archivist for the Ohio Heritage Foundation, a position that sounded grander than it was. Her office was a converted storage room in the basement of the Coldwater Creek Public Library, a space that smelled perpetually of vanilla, decaying paper, and the damp earth of the foundation. She liked it that way. The dead were quiet. They didn't ask for budget reports, and they didn't complain about the temperature. It was just past noon when the package arrived. The courier, a bored teenager chewing gum with a rhythm that grated on Lydia's nerves, dropped it on her desk with a thud that made her delicate china teacup rattle in its saucer. He mumbled for a signature, looking at his phone, and left before Lydia could even ask who had sent it. The door clicked shut, leaving her alone with the rain beating against the high, narrow windows. Lydia stared at the package. It was heavy for its size, denser than a stack of letters. She picked up her silver letter opener and cut the twine. Inside, wrapped in layers of acid-free tissue paper that had yellowed slightly at the edges, was a small velvet-lined case, a daguerreotype case. Her colleague, Professor Arthur Vance, peered over his spectacles from the adjacent desk. Arthur was a man who looked like he had been constructed out of tweed jackets, pipe tobacco, and unread footnotes. He joked that it was likely another donation from a dusty attic, probably a picture of someone's great-aunt's cat or a blurry landscape of a farm that no longer existed. But when Lydia murmured that it felt unusually heavy and unlatched the brass hook, the room went silent. The air seemed to change, thickening with the dust of opened memories. The case opened with a soft creak, the sound of a hinge that hadn't moved in a lifetime. Inside lay a silver-coated copper plate polished to a mirror shine. The image was ghostly and reversed, shifting as it caught the light from the desk lamp. Lydia tilted it toward the window, and 5 faces emerged from the silver fog. 5 young women. They stood in a V formation, rigid, unsmiling, as was the custom of the time when exposure took minutes, not seconds. But there was something intense about them. They didn't look like the usual bored subjects of 19th century portraits, stiff in their corsets and silks. They looked like soldiers standing at attention. They looked like they were holding their breath. Lydia called Arthur over, her voice tight with an emotion she couldn't name. He shuffled to her desk, leaning in with the casual curiosity of a man who has seen 10,000 old photos. He assumed it was a standard mid-century composition, probably 5 sisters based on their matching collars and similar hairstyles. But Lydia reached for her heavy brass magnifying glass. the one she used for deciphering faded handwriting in census ledgers, and told him to look closer. Under the lens, the details exploded into clarity. The daguerreotype process was remarkably sharp, capturing every stray hair, every pore, every thread of fabric. The first girl on the left looked to be the oldest, perhaps 16. Her hair was pulled back severely, but a single tendril had escaped, curling against her cheek. Her eyes were fierce, almost challenging the camera, daring the viewer to look away. This was Adelaide. Next to her stood two girls who were clearly twins. They shared the same high cheekbones, the same stubborn chin. One of them had her hand resting on the shoulder of the girl in front of her, a gesture of protection that spoke volumes. These were Ruth and Mary. The fourth girl was smaller, frail-looking, her dress slightly too big for her frame, bunching at the shoulders. She looked tired, her eyes dark-rimmed. Eleanor, but it was the fifth girl, the one standing on the far right, who stopped Lydia's heart. She was black. In 1852, in a formal family portrait of 4 white sisters in rural Ohio, stood a young African-American girl. She wasn't dressed as a servant. She wasn't standing in the background holding a tray or a fan. She was wearing a dress identical to the others, simple homespun linen with a lace collar. She stood shoulder to shoulder with the twins, her arm linked through the arm of the girl beside her. Her expression was calm, dignified, and utterly equal. This was Cora. Arthur whispered that it was impossible. An integrated portrait in the 1850s without distinction of rank was unheard of. It was socially dangerous, politically radical, and legally complicated. But Lydia moved the glass over the image and pointed out their hands. The girls weren't just standing, they were holding on to each other. A chain of grip and touch that linked all 5 of them together into a single unit. It was a statement. We are one. Lydia turned the case over. Etched into the velvet lining, barely visible, was a faint inscription in gold leaf. The Mercer Girls, August 14, 1852. Before the dark. Lydia abandoned her lunch and went straight to the genealogy archives, pulling the heavy census ledgers from the metal shelves. She muttered the name Mercer as she flipped pages, dust motes dancing in the beam of her lamp. She finally found them in the 1850 census for Coldwater Creek. The head of household was Thomas Mercer, a merchant listed as owning real estate valued at $2,000. His wife was Martha. Listed below were daughters Adelaide, Ruth, Mary, and Eleanor. And then listed as an adopted ward was Cora. The census listed her simply as Cora Mercer, not as a servant or slave, but as a daughter. Arthur realized immediately that the Mercers must have been Quakers, which explained their abolitionist stance. But formal adoption of a black child into a white family in 1850 Ohio was dangerous. The Fugitive Slave Act had just passed. Tensions were high. For a white family to claim a black child as their own, to give her their name and include her in their portrait as an equal, was a radical act of love in a town that was likely hostile to such things. They would have been pariahs, isolated in their convictions. Lydia returned to the photograph, studying the faces with new understanding. Adelaide, the protector, the twins, the solid center, Eleanor, the youngest, and Cora, the survivor, but as she looked closer, a nagging detail caught her attention. She asked Arthur why the girls were dirty. Under the magnifying glass, the truth was grimy. The girls weren't wearing their Sunday best. Their linen dresses were stained with mud at the hems. There were smudges of soot on Adelaide's cheek that she hadn't wiped away. Cora's hands were rough and scratched, the knuckles red even in the monochrome image. One of the twins had a makeshift bandage wrapped around her wrist. This wasn't a vanity portrait. People in the 1850s didn't pay good money to be photographed looking like laborers. They dressed up. They presented their best selves. Arthur realized that the background wasn't a painted studio curtain. It was a blurred outdoor scene, a stone wall with ivy growing on it. And behind the wall, deep in the background, out of focus, there were shapes. Small shapes huddled together. They looked like children, dozens of them. Lydia whispered that it looked like evidence. Why would 5 sisters pose for a portrait in dirty clothes in front of a crowd of children? She moved to the newspaper archives, scrolling through the microfilm of the Coldwater Gazette from August 1852. The machine whirred, scanning through weeks of crop reports, church notices, and advertisements for patent medicines. She found nothing until August 16th, 2 days after the photo was taken. An article detailed a shocking discovery at the abandoned Tanner Mill on the outskirts of town. Authorities had found an illegal indenture operation where over 20 children were locked in basement levels, malnourished and beaten, forced to weave textiles for the black market. These were orphans, runaways, children no one would miss. They had been living in squalor, working 18-hour days. The article stated that the operation was exposed by the daughters of Mr. Thomas Mercer, who reportedly discovered the site while collecting botanical samples near the river. The young women refused to leave the children until the sheriff arrived. Miss Adelaide Mercer and her sisters, including their adopted sibling Cora, provided water and comfort to the victims for 3 days, standing guard over them to ensure the mill owners didn't return to move them. Lydia realized they didn't just find the children. They stayed with them. They had been guarding them. The photograph wasn't taken for vanity. It was commissioned to document the state of the girls after their ordeal, to prove they were there, to shame the town authorities who had let the workhouse exist, to show the bruises in the dirt as badges of honor. Those shapes in the background were the rescued children. Lydia counted 14 of them huddled against the wall. In the corner of the daguerreotype, someone had scratched numbers with a needle. Teen. Saved. These teenagers were heroes who took down a human trafficking ring. But history rarely rewards heroes, especially women who break the rules of race and class. Lydia searched for follow-up articles, wanting to know what happened to the girls. Did they receive a commendation? Did the town celebrate them? She found the next mention of the Mercer family 6 months later, in February 1853. The article described a catastrophic fire that claimed the residence of Thomas Mercer. Mr. and Mrs. Mercer perished in the flames along with their 5 daughters, Adelaide, Ruth, Mary, Eleanor, and Cora. No survivors. The sheriff ruled the fire accidental, citing an overturned lamp in the parlor, though neighbors reported smelling kerosene hours before the smoke was seen. Lydia slammed the book shut, her hands shaking. It wasn't an accident. It was murder. They testified against the workhouse owners, shut down a profitable illegal business, and someone burned them alive for it. The timeline was too perfect. The motive was too clear. The Mercers had embarrassed powerful men, and those men had erased them. The office was silent. Lydia looked at the 5 faces in the silver plate. They weren't just sisters. They were martyrs. They had stood in the mud, holding hands, protecting the vulnerable, unaware that their courage was signing their death warrants. The fire took everything: the house, the records, the bodies. This photograph might be the only proof that they ever existed as a family. But Arthur asked the crucial question: if everyone died, who sent the photo? Who kept it safe for 170 years? Lydia picked up the brown paper wrapping. The postmark was from Coldwater Creek, mailed locally just days ago. Inside the envelope, stuck to the bottom where she hadn't seen it before, was a small, folded piece of paper. Lydia unfolded it. It was a note written in a shaky, elderly hand on floral stationery. It read, "My grandmother kept this hidden in her Bible. She said she was the 15th child, the one they hid in the barn when the fire started. She said the Mercer girls didn't die screaming. They died singing. Please tell their story before I join them. There was a survivor, A witness, the 15th child, someone who had been there the night the house burned. But the story wasn't over. The photograph had one more secret to tell. Lydia took the magnifying glass one last time and zoomed in on Cora's hand. Cora was holding something small and dark against her dress. It looked like a locket. Lydia scanned the plate at high resolution. On the monitor, inside the open locket, tiny as a pinhead, was a face. It wasn't a portrait of a lover or a parent. It was a man with a scar across his eye, looking at the camera with cold, dead eyes. Cora wanted us to see him. She was identifying him. She was holding the evidence up to the lens, freezing the face of her enemy in silver. The man who ran the workhouse, or the man who lit the match. This wasn't just a memorial. It was an indictment. And Lydia knew she had to find out who he was. The face in the locket was small, grainy, and utterly terrifying. It was the face of a man who believed he owned the world and everyone in it. The scar running from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone was a jagged white line, a permanent sneer carved into his flesh. Lydia Harrow printed the image and pinned it to the corkboard in her office, right next to the census records and the newspaper clipping about the fire. The room was quiet, save for the hum of the computer and the distant sound of rain, but the tension was palpable. They had a suspect, they had a motive, but they didn't have a name. Arthur Vance was already at the microfilm reader, his fingers flying over the controls as he scrolled through the Coldwater Gazette from 1850 to 1853. He knew that if this man was prominent enough to run a workhouse, or dangerous enough to burn down a mansion and get away with it, he must be in the records somewhere. A businessman, a politician, or a criminal masquerading as a pillar of society. They searched for hours, eyes straining against the flickering light of the screen. The silence of the library basement felt heavy, the weight of the Mercer tragedy pressing down on them. They were looking for a needle in a haystack of newsprint, hunting a ghost through columns of advertisements for farm equipment and notices about stray cattle. Then Arthur stopped. He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "Lydia," he said, his voice low, "look at this." It was an article from September 1852, exactly 1 month after the raid on the workhouse. It wasn't a crime report. It was a puff piece, a profile of a local philanthropist who had just donated a new bronze bell to the town church. The sketch accompanying the article showed a man in a fine suit smiling benevolently at the artist. But the scar was there, drawn in ink, unmistakable. Mr. Silas Thorne, owner of the Thorne textile mill and candidate for city council. "Thorne," Arthur whispered, reading the name as if it were a curse. The article about the raid said the children were found at the abandoned Miller tannery. But Silas Thorne owned a textile mill. Textiles. Weaving. Lydia connected the dots instantly. The children were weaving textiles, she said. The tannery was just a front, a warehouse. Thorne was using it to process wool and cotton off the books, using slave labor, child labor, to undercut his competitors. He was building his fortune on the backs of orphans. "And the Mercer girls exposed him," Arthur said. "They raided his operation, they cost him a fortune, and they humiliated him publicly right before an election." The motive was clear. It wasn't just business, it was personal: greed, revenge, and silence. Silas Thorne couldn't let the Mercer family testify against him. He couldn't let them ruin his political ambitions, so he burned them. He waited until the fervor died down, until the sheriff grew complacent, and then he struck. But there was a gap in the story, a gaping hole that didn't make sense. If Thorne was powerful enough to cover up a mass murder in 1853, why wasn't there a record of his trial? Why did the newspaper call the fire an accident? Why wasn't he in prison? Lydia went back to the archives, her heart pounding. She searched for Silas Thorne's obituary. She found it in 1860. Silas Thorne, former city councilman, died peacefully in his sleep at his residence. He had gotten away with it. He had lived a full life, respected by the town, buried in consecrated ground, while the Mercer girls lay in unmarked graves, their bones mixed with the ash of their home. "It's not fair," Lydia said, her voice trembling with a rage that felt personal. "He won. He killed them, he erased them, and he died a wealthy man." "Did he?" Arthur asked. He was holding a folder of court documents he had pulled from the county archives shelf. "Lydia, look at his probate records. When Thorne died in 1860, his estate was insolvent. He was bankrupt. He died with nothing but the clothes on his back." Lydia frowned. "How? He owned the mill. He owned half the town." "Lawsuits," Arthur said, spreading the papers out on the desk. "Starting in March 1853. Just 1 month after the fire. Dozens of lawsuits filed against the Thorne mill for breach of contract and unsafe conditions and financial impropriety and land disputes. Every business deal he tried to make was blocked. Every loan he applied for was denied. His suppliers stopped selling to him. His buyers stopped buying." "Who filed them?" Lydia asked. "Who had the power to do that?" Arthur slid a document across the desk. "Look at the plaintiff." Lydia read the name. The estate of Thomas Mercer. "But Thomas Mercer was dead," she said. "The whole family died in the fire." "The family died," Arthur corrected, tapping the paper. "But the estate didn't. Someone was managing the Mercer assets. Someone was using the Mercer money to sue Silas Thorne into oblivion. Someone spent 7 years systematically destroying Thorne's business, his reputation, and his life until he died penniless." Lydia looked at the documents. The legal strategy was brilliant. It was a war of attrition. Whoever was behind this hadn't sought criminal justice because the sheriff was in Thorne's pocket. They had sought economic justice. They had bled him dry. "Who?" Lydia asked. "Who survived to do that? Who had the knowledge and the will?" Arthur pulled out one last document. It was a deed of transfer for the Mercer property, dated March 1853, barely a month after the fire. Transferred to Miss Sarah Freeman. "Sarah," Lydia whispered. "Cora's name before she was adopted, or a pseudonym?" "Wait," Arthur said. "Look at the witness signature." The signature was shaky, written in a hand that looked like it belonged to someone in pain, someone whose hand might have been burned. Cora Mercer. Lydia gasped. Cora survived. The realization hit them like a physical blow. Cora, the adopted daughter, the black sister, hadn't died in the fire. She had escaped, and she hadn't just run away, she had stayed. She had taken a new name, Sarah Freeman, and she had used her father's money, likely hidden in bank accounts Thorne couldn't touch, to wage a war against the man who killed her family. She was the 15th child, Lydia said, remembering the note in the package. The note said the grandmother was the 15th child hidden in the barn, but maybe Cora was the one who hid her. Maybe Cora got the children out and then went back for her sisters. And when she couldn't save them, she saved herself to avenge them. And she won, Arthur said. She didn't kill him. She did something worse. She took his power. She took his legacy. They had to find out where Cora went. If she survived, she must have lived somewhere. She must have been buried somewhere. Lydia searched the 1860 census. She found a Sarah Freeman living in a boarding house in Cincinnati. Occupation, teacher, and living with her was a young girl aged 8, name Hope Freeman. Hope, Lydia smiled through her tears. She raised one of the rescued children, the 15th child. The story unspooled before them. Cora Mercer, scarred by the fire, heartbroken but unbroken, had taken the survivors and built a new life. She had used the Mercer fortune to destroy Silas Thorne legally, stripping him of his power without ever firing a shot, and she had raised the next generation to remember. The package came from a descendant of Hope Freeman. Cora must have kept the daguerreotype. She must have passed it down as proof. This is who we were. This is what we did. This is the man we defeated. We have to finish it, Arthur said. We have to put Thorne's face next to theirs. We have to tell the truth about the fire. Lydia spent the next month preparing the exhibit. She blew up the image of the locket until Silas Thorne's cold eyes were visible from across the room. She framed the articles about the raid. She framed the probate records showing Thorne's bankruptcy. And in the center, under a spotlight, she placed the daguerreotype of the Mercer Sisters. 5 girls holding hands, dirty and tired, but standing together. On the opening night of the exhibit, the library was packed. People from Coldwater Creek came to see the lost history of their town. They stared at the photo, they read the story of the rescue, they looked at the face of Silas Thorne, a man whose name was on a street sign 3 blocks away, and realized he was a monster. But the most emotional moment came at the end of the night. An elderly woman walked in. She was African American with silver hair and a posture that reminded Lydia instantly of the girl in the photo. She walked up to the display case. She placed a hand on the glass right over Cora's face. "Dr. Harrow?" she asked. Lydia stepped forward. "Yes, I'm Sarah," the woman said. "Sarah Freeman. My great-great-grandmother was Hope. Cora raised her." Lydia felt her knees go weak. "You sent the package." "I did," Sarah said. "It was time. I'm the last of my line. I didn't want the story to die with me." She looked at the photo of the sisters. Cora never talked about the fire, but she talked about her sisters. She said Adelaide was the bravest person she ever knew. She said the twins could make anyone laugh. And she said Eleanor was the one who spotted the workhouse first. "She saved them," Lydia said. "Cora saved their memory." "She did more than that," Sarah said. She reached into her purse and pulled out a Sumno velvet pouch. "She saved this." Sarah opened the pouch. Inside lay a charred, blackened piece of metal. It was a locket, the same locket from the photograph. "She went back into the house," Sarah whispered. "After the roof collapsed. She tried to find bodies, she couldn't, but she found this in the ashes. It was in Adelaide's hand." Lydia took the locket. It was cold and heavy. She opened it. The picture of Silas Thorne was gone, burned away. But etched into the inside cover, scratched with a needle, were 5 initials. ARMEC Adelaide. Ruth, Mary, Eleanor, Cora. "They inscribed it," Lydia said, weeping openly now. "Before they died, they marked it." "They knew," Sarah said. "They knew they might not make it, so they left a sign. We were here. We were sisters." The exhibit became a permanent fixture in Coldwater Creek. The town council voted to rename Thorne Street. It is now Mercer Avenue. The story of the Mercer Sisters isn't just a tragedy. It's a testament. It reminds us that history isn't just what is written in books. It is what is kept in lockets. It is what is hidden in attics. It is what is passed down in whispers from mother to daughter. Cora Mercer didn't just survive. She won. She defeated the man who took her family, and she ensured that 170 years later, 5 girls in dirty dresses would be remembered as heroes, while the man in the fine suit would be remembered as nothing but a scar on the face of the town. Lydia Harrow retired a year later. She left the daguerreotype in its case, safe in the archives. But every year on August 14th, she goes to the old cemetery where the Mercer family marker stands, a stone paid for by Cora in 1855. She places 5 white roses on the grave, and 1 single red rose for Cora. Because some bonds are stronger than fire, Some families are built not by blood but by courage. And some pictures, if you look closely enough, don't just show you the past. They show you the soul.